Like, for God's sakes, they're trying to segregate voting maps now. Like, maybe a few decades ago. Okay, horrible, but at least in line with what you expect. But now, they don't care. They are actively regressing as a party, and they know it they know it fully. They don't care. Democracy is just another tool for them to win, and if they're not winning with democracy, which they haven't been for the past few decades, well, I guess that means it's time for them to just kind of throw it out the window, alongside your personal and individual freedoms, and I guess your right to not be segregated. Hey everybody, how's it going? So, recently I released a video, and it was bad. Frankly, pretty bad by my standards even, and I feel pretty bad about it. So I thought I'd make a short little video that could entertain you and alert you to a pretty uncomfortable fact about one of America's most dominant nursing homes. That they absolutely, wholeheartedly despise democracy. Recently, the Republican Party launched what can only be described as a brazen and offensive attack on American democracy, specifically early and mail-in voting. As of 2022, the chair of the Arizona Republican Party has been petitioning relentlessly for the banning of mail-in voting, a system that is incredibly popular within the state, alongside a further prohibition of any sort of early voting at all. Basically, they just want several million people to cram into voting booths on one singular day in a state where election days aren't guaranteed holidays. Remember, this is the party of small government. I'm assuming the small thing we're talking about here is the time before somebody has a heat stroke, because I can think of nothing more fun than cramming into a voting booth in Arizona of all places. Did I mention that they've already implemented voting laws to stop illegal immigrants from voting? I wonder why they would do that. They justify their anti-democratic positions by stating that the Arizona state constitution is strongly against any sort of early mail-in voting or really early voting in general, alongside the obvious and inexcusable extreme mail-in voter fraud that, occurred during the most secure election in US history. I mean, just like, by God, the absolute gall it takes to argue in favor of making voting so extremely difficult while discussing how important democratic consensus is. Thankfully, the judge presiding over this issue, Lee Jansen, blessed be his name, realized the lunacy behind such an anti-democratic attack and shot it down. But in the grand scheme of things, what does that really mean? It means that they get to try again. It means they get to keep trying until they hit the right mark and ban something integral to American democracy. It isn't like this is a unique factor or something out of the blue. I mean, they did try to storm the capital of the United States, and they got off pretty scot-free. Remember, it's not like they're stupid. They're aware that pretty much the entire state enjoys both mail-in voting and early voting. But you and I know that they don't care, and that's not really what matters to them at all. It's about slowly eroding democracy and winning every small battle so when the real struggle comes, the blow is entirely fatal. Remember, the Nazis attempted their own coup d'etat before they seized power, the Beer Hall Putsch, and they were punished with more severity than the Republican Party was after January 6th. What does that say about our democracy when we can't even punish coup attempts with the same severity as republics that collapsed into Nazism and fascism? It certainly sets an ominous precedent at the very least. After the 2020 election alone, the Republican Party passed dozens of laws that increased the difficulty of voting and specifically of targeting communities of color. They've been doing this for decades pretty much, but now they have a common goal: the explicit degradation of American democracy, and they're not going to stop with any simple slap on the wrist. Republicans tried to seize power. They tried to reverse the results of a legitimate and secure election with a violent seizing of the US Capitol, and thankfully they failed. But I get the impression from liberals and even a few leftists that, like, suddenly it's over. Newsflash, nothing has fundamentally changed. Republicans have and will continue to do things like this. Their voting base is completely energized and well willing to support anything that they believe is destroying democracy. Like voting. That's the point we've arrived at now. Like, man, isn't that just crazy? Just a few decades ago, we were calling this part of, like, American history the end of history because we had won. I'm speechless. I'm thinking of something funny to say. I'm out. I'm out. I'm completely out. History has kicked America so hard in the balls that we are quaking. Obviously enough, though, the Arizona Republican Party and the National Republican Party are going to continue these flagrant and disgusting attacks in our democratic process. It isn't like they're getting any quieter about their political dispositions either. Marjorie Taylor Greene's offices just recently acquired Milo Yiannopoulos, conversion camped gay man and, neo-Nazi. I can't describe to you how surreal and sort of dreadful it is to grow up in a time like this where neo-Nazis are openly working for politicians. I mean, just recently they were marching through my streets, so I shouldn't be too surprised, I guess. Like, for God's sakes, they're trying to segregate voting maps now. Like, maybe a few decades ago. Okay, horrible, but at least in line with what you expect. But now, they don't care. They are actively regressing as a party, and they know it they know it fully. They don't care. Democracy is just another tool for them to win, and if they're not winning with democracy, which they haven't been for the past few decades, well, I guess that means it's time for them to just kind of throw it out the window, alongside your personal and individual freedoms, and I guess your right to not be segregated. And before you go, oh, but the Democrats have a radical wing too. Shut your mouth. The idea that the two political radical wings in America are even comparable is inconceivable. One is arguing for things like universal health care and public transportation, and the other one is talking about banning Pride Month to halt the extermination of straight people. Like, I'm sure a few Republicans know what extermination looks like, and I'm sure they would love to advise you on it. Republicans used to wear the skin of a party of personal freedom, kind of like a flayed one from Warhammer. They just kind of peeled it off and danced around with it. But now they don't even care enough to pretend. You can't prove your innocence in court. You better not talk about LGBTQ people. And God forsake you if you want to talk about MLK or maybe a few genocides without discussing the other side. Like, oh God, I can't wait till my biology textbooks have like fascist racial science in them so I understand what the other side was coming from. Stupid joke and, an obvious outfit and lighting change aside, the Republican Party has really started the warpath now, and that should illustrate to you how in danger and fragile our democracy is when one half is actively willing to participate in coups that would install pretty much fascist dictatorships. That should motivate the Democratic Party, but it seems as if they don't really want to acknowledge that fact. It's kind of like they've beaten away one shark and they're just kind of watching the rest of the swarm surround them, like passively. There are so many things the Democratic Party could be saying and doing, but they seem really content to just kind of sit on their hands and talk about how important like bipartisanship is, while the other party is compromising on what length of rope to hang them from. This is kind of dramatic, but it's kind of like an abusive relationship, and the Democratic Party is like a battered housewife. This should really emphasize how important it is that you get involved in politics, even if you don't necessarily enjoy it, because one half of the aisle is kind of going insane, and the other half is kind of sitting on their hands. Maybe, there's an imbalance that needs to be corrected there. So, obviously, above all, just stay involved, because I'd rather not live in a wasteland racked with political instability and constant coup attempts, and I don't think you would either, so just dwell on my words if you're so inclined. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it a little bit more than the last one. It wasn't like bad by any means. I was being a little dramatic in the start, but it definitely wasn't the highest quality that I wanted to achieve. Please consider liking and subscribing and sticking around. I've got a lot of stuff coming up, and I would love to show you it. And I hope you are willing to watch me grow on this platform. You have a good day, because I sure as hell will. Goodbye.